Welcome back, everyone. My name is Laura Sinclair, and today I'm going to be covering the part 3 of our 3-part Erector webinar series. And today I'm going to be covering the on-site phase. Previously, we recorded the bid phase and the pre-planning phase, which can be located on our YouTube channel. So to briefly summarize my first webinar, I was able to take my prefabrication model that was located inside of Revit and bring in that information inside of SDS2. I could see what type of members could be liftable and able to place in what the cranes were that I wanted to use for this job. I could send that information out to BidWizard for the prefabrication model, and then I could compare that with my fabrication model inside of SDS2. So with that information, I could see what my heaviest members were, if my crane placements were correct, and send that information to BidWizard as well, and compare the two to see how far off I was. So to recap the pre-planning phase, in this one, I was able to use that model that I had previously from my fabrication model and start mapping out what I wanted for my Erector sequences. Inside of there, I was able to compare to make sure that those were where I wanted my crane placements to go and see what my heaviest members were and start assigning these members to different lifts. So I was able to utilize more crane tools. I was able to run more reports since all of that model information is going to be the most accurate. And then I could send this information to Fortisy, which will be SDS2's load planning solution. And I'm able to start loading this onto trucks. So today I'm going to be covering once the steel actually gets to the site and how it can help the erectors using SDS2. I'll be able to track the productivity of the steel erected, and it's going to show up on site, and then it'll also show up in my model back in my fabrication model too, and maybe even in the shop. Then I'm able to run accurate information from that 3D model since it's going to be the most accurate, and that's going to help me see maybe how many field bolts I need to have, maybe even a summary, maybe my field bolt point-to-point list, and I'll go into that more in depth later on. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to type them in the chat area and I'll make sure to answer some of them at the end. So alright, I'm going to go ahead and jump back into my model here. This model was graciously provided to us by Ascension Group Architects, Layton Construction, and Structural Detailing LLC. So fabrication sequences and erector sequences have already been created back in the fabrication model, but now that I'm out in the field, I want to actually look what they look like. So now I'm able to start comparing the two. So I had my fabricator sequences and now here's my erector sequences. The cyan's going to be my erector sequence 1 and the magenta is going to be my erector sequence 2. Now that I have that, now maybe I want to actually see what's been fabricated and what's been shipped. I'm going to want to start planning out in the field what I can start erecting. So everything in orange has already been fabricated and shipped and it's coming to site. And everything that's in magenta has been fabricated but not shipped quite yet. After seeing what's been fabricated versus shipped, I may need to communicate back a new plan to my fabricator so that I have all my steel delivered to the site in a timely manner. In the previous webinar, I was able to create a report for the piecemark, erector sequence, and steel type so that I could see this and transfer it out into the field. If I'm the erector out in the field, I can run this report myself so I don't have to wait for the fabricator or the detailer to send that information to me. It's really simple to filter all the information in here in this report. And then I can start using this as my ship mark and weights. Before the steel's even been fabricated or arrived to site, I can start seeing what has already been shop assembled. So I have that assembly from my first webinar and I can start to pull information from that. Maybe I want to see what bolts are in there that are not the standard bolts. So I have it that everything's going to be gray, but you can see all of the bolts that are showing up as cyan are my non-standard bolts that are 1 1/8 inch. Sticking on this assembly, I want to know how many field bolts I'm going to need to erect this assembly. I can run a quick field bolt summary on this assembly. And then it's going to show me just a quick summary of what I'm going to need to erect this. I can even take this one step further and go more in depth on which field bolts are going to be needed for which piece marks for this assembly. A benefit of having this 3D model instead of waiting on a detailer or a fabricator to get back to me on my question, I can view this 2D drawing of the member, or I can view it of the erection drawing myself right away. I also don't have to go through and comb through all of the drawings. I can open them from this location. I'm just going to use Bluebeam, and then you can do quick and easy markups too. So it's going to be associated with this member, and it's a really quick and easy way to find what you're looking for the drawings instead of sifting through everything. I could not only just do a search for this piece mark on the drawing, and it's going to take me right to where that's located inside of Bluebeam, but also inside of the 3D model, you can do a find for that piece mark, and it'll take you right to where that's positioned inside of the model. I already know that the assembly that I was just working on can be lifted from my previous webinar. But let's say I have another question on this assembly right here, if that can all be lifted with a crane placement. I could send out an RFI, otherwise I could also create a model note like I previously did. I'm just going to add in a model note here, just wondering to verify if this can all be lifted together. Let's say as the erector, I want my color to be red, so that those all show up as red if the erector has a question. Inside the comments is going to be a way just to communicate back and forth inside of the model, so the engineer, erector, detailer, fabricator could all be looking at these model notes inside of the 3D fabrication model. So now that I come in here, I can see the picture that I attached, so maybe it's actually a picture out in the field. I could attach it there as well, just saying maybe this isn't going to work, or I have a question about this situation. The model viewer is just going to be a way to keep track of all of the different model notes inside of the model, and then I can see where they're at inside of the model by double clicking them. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and turn back on my erector sequences here. I can then run a field bolt point to point. I don't have to have the erector sequences on. I just personally like to have them on, so knowing which members I'm going to select for this report. I can then load my erector sequence 1 and 2. And then I want to see a list of all of these members that are inside of erector sequence 1 and 2. And then I can go ahead and use those for reviewing complex framing situations before they're even in the field to be erected. I can also eliminate extensive punch lists here. If I find an issue in the field, I can quickly create an RFI of this issue and send it back to my detailer or my fabricator. Another example could be if the erector was working in the trailer and I have a guy out in the field asking me for the erector sequence 1 and 2 and what they look like. I can send him out a 3D PDF, and this is going to be a color-coded for my guys to see in the field on their tablets. I could send out everything in this PDF, but I'm just going to show the erector sequence 1 and 2 since that's what they have a question on. I do like to open this up in Bluebeam. It's going to give me a lot of the property information for the steel. As I open this in Bluebeam, you'll start to see that it's a color-coded PDF, so I can rotate around, or I can even click on one of the pieces of steel, and the model tree down below is going to show every piece of material that's going to make up that entity. So that beam, every single piece of material that makes up that beam is going to be located underneath that beam. And if I click on it as well, it's going to show up exactly where it's located inside of that PDF, which I personally really like. Alright, so since I have the crane placement in there, I have all the crane information in there, I can actually start generating more reports for this crane information. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do a pick list report. This is just going to be a pick list for this placement, and it's going to show me all of the list of steel that belongs with that crane placement that I generated the last webinar. This isn't going to be an ordered pick list, but it's just going to show everything. You can see from the previous webinar, I have my multi-lift in there, I have my decking, I have my heaviest member, And I have a lot of the other members associated with this crane placement. I can also start generating a lot more reports like the critical lift report, a define lift report. But what I'm actually going to do is show some real life examples from Douglas Steel Fabrication on how they actually utilize these. So this is the critical lift report by Douglas Steel Fabrication Corporation, and it's going to start to show the critical lifts that they have for their crane placement. Another one that I can show is the define lift report that they've created. So in the second webinar, we were able to generate crane placements, and then you could view those out in the field. This is how Douglas Steel utilizes their crane placements, and then you can actually view these on the tablet. It's going to say the crane placement number and the actual elevation that they need to go at. And so then you can start to visualize where those actually need to go out in the job. Since I used Fortisee SDS2's load planning solution to load my truck, I was able to pull that order of erection information from my 3D fabrication model. Since this was the order of erection that I needed to erect my model, then I can erect straight from the back of my truck if needed. As I'm taking steel off the back of the truck, I can scan the barcode, and since we integrate with P2 software, then that information is going to automatically update in the status information for that member. So let's say that the steel is starting to get erected in my sequence 1 and sequence 2 for my Erector sequences. I can always manually come in here and update one member, or I can batch update as well. I already batch updated this just for time permitting purposes, and then I can run my status information to see what's been erected and what hasn't. I set one up ahead of time so that my green would be everything that's been erected last week, my purple is everything that's been erected this week, and then the gray is everything that has not been erected so far. I then can send all of the status information back to my 3D fabrication model to not only ensure that it's up to date, but to ensure that everything's going to remain on time. So being able to utilize the fabricator's 3D model is not only going to help everyone visually, but it's also going to give the guys out in the field the confidence to show that the steel that they're erecting is what the fabricator and the detailer are expecting. Going along the lines as visually, I can also import in like a Google Earth image and then plop that down just so you can visually see inside of the model how it's going to look out in the field too. Now that I have Erector sequence 1 and 2 erected, I can then run an erected by weekly report. This is going to show the weeks that it's erected and the count and the tonnage that's been erected so far. I can break that down as well and go into erected by date, so that could show me every single member that's been erected so far and each day that it's erected. And then the last one that I can run is erected versus not erected, the weight, so the total tonnage that's been erected and not erected. That concludes today's webinar of Erector in the field or the on-site phase. We were able to cover how this could benefit the erector at the job site, extracting accurate information for reports from the 3D fabrication model, and utilizing the 3D model as a great visual tool. I'll now give you a few moments to type in your questions.